Today's video may contain sensitive subject matter, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And thank you. I think this happened back around 2003, when we lived in Mississippi. I was about 14 at the time, and my little brother would have been around 9. And we had gone trick-or-treating for several years up to this point, and the year prior we did a lot of it around our neighborhood by ourselves. I always loved going door to door, and was even more fun when it was just the two of us. I felt like a grown-up being in charge of my little brother. I was also really looking forward to that year because my brother and I really enjoyed the movie Lilo and Stitch, and he wanted to dress up as Stitch. I was really close to my brother, so I decided that I would go as Lilo and make us a cute matching pair as well as an easy costume for me. While I love Halloween and trick-or-treating, I had a sensory issue and still do. So I don't like to wear a lot of things or layers at once. I already had long dark hair, so I didn't even need a wig. Just a cute little red dress, really. The problem I had that year, though, was what I was hearing on the news. There had been reports of a couple of kids that had gone missing that were close to my age. I wasn't good with locations, so I don't remember what city it was in exactly, but I do remember that it was somewhere close to us. It honestly scared me, as I realized how many times I was alone. My parents often left me at home with and without my brother when they had to run to the store, or something short like that. I had to walk down the street to go to the bus stop, and my parents wouldn't even be able to see me from the front door. I even rode my bike around the block or down to the little gas station by myself. Hearing these stories of kids coming up missing, it alarmed me. But my parents didn't seem to think there was anything to worry about. When the news stories came up, my mom would always make remarks about how stupid can you be, and would criticize the parents and blame them for not watching their kids closely. However, she still told us to walk the block by ourselves. And when I asked if it was okay, she pretty much said, yeah, why wouldn't it be? Parents of the year, right? So, we all got dressed up, and I made sure to bring my dad's shop flashlight, because it was made of some pretty hefty metal, and I stuffed it in my candy bag. I figured it would be good to have as both a light source and a possible weapon. I also made a mental note while we were out to keep a close eye on our surroundings. I was a little nervous since this whole night involved us going to strangers' houses alone, but because Halloween was one of my favorite holidays, I was determined to remain vigilant, and also have a good time, so as to not worry or frighten my little brother. We made our way uphill first, as there were only 3 houses that way, before we rounded the corner. After the turn, there was an empty house because I remember them recently renovating it, and then the road curved into a cul-de-sac that had 4 houses in it. We went to each one of those, and between just those few houses, our bags were already feeling pretty full. Between our candy load and how excited my brother was, I was starting to loosen up a bit and have more fun with it. We left the dead end and continued down the road, making our way to a house that had really gone all out. The whole yard was covered in creepy decorations from a gory graveyard, moving ghosts in the tree, and they even made a path that you had to walk through to get to the door. One guy was even in a Grim Reaper costume, standing still until you walked by, and would scare you. I was surprised that my brother wanted to go through it, and in fact, he laughed after getting scared. When we got to the door, the older couple complimented our costumes, gave us a big handful of candy, and asked us a few questions. After chatting some, we left through the other side of the yard and back through the front gate. As we walked a bit, my brother was getting excited about one of the little toys that he noticed the last house had handed out, and started digging in his bag while we walked. He was wanting to carry it with him, but I was trying to get him to stop until we got to the corner where there was better light. Unfortunately, the exact thing I was wanting to avoid happened when we nearly ran into someone in front of us. At first, I looked up to see this tall man wearing some kind of hooded poncho or something. And when I think back about this event, I start to realize that I had no idea where this guy had come from. There was a small group of kids and adults ahead of us, but they had already moved on, and no one had walked by us since we left the house. I suppose he could have been behind us and got ahead when we stopped at the house, but I don't recall ever seeing someone ahead of us. Anyways, I gasped a bit as I stepped backwards and apologized to the man. His response to this was saying in a really creepy way, "Oh, it's alright, baby girl. Are you okay?" My parents don't even call me that, so it immediately made me feel weird. So I just said that I was fine and grabbed my brother's hand and walked around him. I started feeling like I was being watched, so I looked back, and I saw the guy still standing in the same spot, but now facing towards us. I turned back around and tried to get my brother to speed up so we could get to the next house. As we left the next one, the poncho guy was standing on the sidewalk right by the house. He was smiling, and he made a comment about our bags looking heavy, and asked if we needed help carrying them. I wasn't very well mannered when it came to being scared or people that made me uncomfortable, so I just said no, as firm and grown up as I could, and again pulled my brother along. I was really starting to become more panicked at this point, wondering what this guy's true intentions were. Surely it wasn't just a ruse to take our candy. He was an adult, or at least looked like it, so he could have gotten some on his own. So, if not the candy, what else would he want with young kids like us? It started freaking me out more when I thought about the kids that had been kidnapped recently. Was this guy responsible for them? Was he trying to find a good opportunity to grab us, too? I started looking around to see if there were any adults nearby, or even a group of children that I saw earlier, thinking we would at least be safer with them. But even they were gone. My last hope was Ms. Marcia's house. Marcia was an older lady that worked at the front desk of the office that my mom worked for. She was very sweet and always gave my brother and I some kind of treat when we went there with my mom for any reason. She actually lived on the road parallel, or behind our home basically, which was also the road that we were on. It was a few houses down after the corner, so I started telling my brother that we should go to her house first. He didn't seem to mind, possibly because he was reading the situation too, or he was just getting tired. As we passed the first house, I heard the familiar creepy voice saying, "Hey, you missed one, didn't you?" Before I could say anything though, my brother yelled out, "You're being weird." So I again held his hand, and we ran. I was scared that this guy would get mad at my brother's comment, although I was glad that he said it, and possibly chase us, so I wanted to get there fast. We made it to her house, and I pushed my brother ahead of me as I grabbed his bag from him and started knocking on the door. Thankfully she was home, and had a bowl of candy in her arms. I frantically asked her if we could come in, as I looked behind me and I didn't see the guy. She of course invited us in, shutting the door behind us, asking what was wrong. I started explaining the situation to her, and she said that I did a very smart thing by trying to avoid him and going to her home immediately. She gave us both some water, and we sat there and watched TV while she went to call our mom. After a short time, there was a knock on the door. I was trying to keep calm, thinking it was Halloween after all, and thinking that it was probably just kids. But when Marcia answered the door, it was that same guy. He tried giving her some story about us being his kids, and apologized for us running into her house. Marcia, knowing our parents of course, told him off, saying he needed to leave as the cops had already been called. I remember his face clearly at this point, trying to look past her at us, and I heard him say, "Oh, I must have the wrong house. Good night," and walk away. She shut the door but went and sat at the window, presumably watching where he went. It didn't take long for my parents to show up, and then the cops around the same time. We told them what happened while we were out, and described the guy the best that we could since it was dark. I remember giving Marcia a big hug before we left, being incredibly thankful that she was there, as I would have been shy just asking some random person to come into their house. As far as I'm aware, the guy was never found, which is still terrifying, but sometimes I wonder what his intentions were, and think, could it have been the same guy from the news? Also, we just went home that night from there, and my parents followed us in the car the following years. I guess at least they agreed to do that. When I was a kid, I used to go trick-or-treating with my friends. I live in Australia, so keep in mind that Halloween isn't as popular here as it is in the US. A lot of people tend to think that it's an American tradition. It has begun to grow in popularity, though, and more people do take part in it every year. It's something that I'm going to take my kids to do, provided things go well, and I do live in a safe area. People also sometimes dress up at work, or there are Halloween parties. This was in the late 90s, so keep that in mind that things were different back then. My friends and I were 15, and none of us had really been trick-or-treating before. I had a younger brother who I took out trick-or-treating, and managed to get some of his candy out of it too. My friends and I dropped him off at home and told my parents that we were going to be out for a while longer. It was the weekend, so none of us had to be home to go to bed for school or anything. There were 3 boys and 3 girls along with myself, so 7 in total. A couple of people commented on our lack of effort, and, well, they weren't wrong. We were also told that we were a bit old to be trick-or-treating, and yeah, we were. As for our costumes, we didn't bother to dress up, and we wore our usual street clothes. We were pretty lazy about it. All we wanted was some free candy, and maybe we could get a can of drink or something. The area that we lived in was pretty safe. Mostly families, but it was in a low-income area, so the type of kids here tended to vary a lot. It wasn't uncommon for kids to be out playing late in the afternoon, or staying out until the streetlights came on. So around 6 or 7 p.m. We generally had a good idea about the types of people who lived around here, and adjusted our behavior accordingly depending on who was around. We walked and knocked on several doors along the stop. Quite a few people told us that they weren't interested, and some just blatantly told us to screw off. We weren't surprised and joked about how we would come back later to egg their house. We were absolutely full of it because we weren't going to. We were laughing and carrying on like idiots while we walked, and walked toward the dimly lit house at the end of the street. Usually, when people didn't leave their lights on, it was a sign that they weren't interested and to just leave them alone. We were being little a-holes though, so I guess you could say that we did invite this to happen to us. We ran up to the door, knocked loudly, and giggled. We could hear the faint sound of the TV in a nearby room. I can't remember what was on the TV at the time, though. There were no signs that this person was going to get up to open the door. No footsteps or sound of keys. And we knocked again, even louder this time, and a man came to the door. He opened it roughly and stared down at us with an exhausted and angry expression. When he opened the door, I smelled the aroma of garbage, and I think that he may have been a hoarder too. He looked rough as guts. He smelled like he hadn't showered for a long time. His beard was messy and had food scraps in it. His pajamas were stained and smelled disgusting. There were dark circles under his eyes, and looking back, he looked like he was going through a pretty rough time. I regretted knocking on the door and stepped backwards. I think I murmured an apology or something. Before he had the chance to ask us what we wanted or what we were doing, my friends were being jerks and called out aloud, "A trick or treat," at him while holding up their plastic bags open in hopes of treats being put inside. The man blinked to himself and murmured that Halloween was an American tradition and that he didn't celebrate it. That he wanted us to leave him alone, and that he didn't have anything he could give us anyways. It was difficult to understand what he had been saying because he was mumbling under his breath. He tried to close the door, but one of my friends kicked at it and threatened to egg his house if he didn't give us anything. Sure, we were kids, but I have to admit that I was pretty shocked to hear my friend behave like this. We could be pretty obnoxious at times, but that was something else. I can't remember if I told them to stop or not. I was so surprised by what happened. My friend must have pushed the man too far, because the man reached for a baseball bat he had by the side of the door and swung it at our friends. He screamed at us, telling us that he was going to mess us all up and not to come near his house ever again, or we would get what was coming to us. We all screamed and began to run away as fast as we could to escape him. Yeah, we were cowards, and we wasted no time in running away as fast as possible. For someone who looked the way he did, he could move really fast. I looked back now and then, and when we went around the block, he must have stopped, and we all caught our breaths at one of the local parks. We were breathing and started laughing. I don't think we ever tried to go trick-or-treating after that. I'm a parent myself now, and you can bet that I make sure my children are always incredibly respectful when we go trick-or-treating these days. Admittedly, I was a foolish and immature teenage girl when I graduated high school 23 years ago. While others were focused on securing military futures and/or furthering their education, I was really only looking forward to move out of my parents' home and moving in with my high school sweetheart. It would end up being a huge mistake that I regret to this day, but I digress. For the sake of anonymity, we'll call him Jack. Though we lived in different towns and attended different schools, Jack and I had been dating for a few years prior to graduation. When we weren't in school, we were inseparable, so it was no surprise to anyone when we started looking for a place to rent and move in together. What did come as a surprise, however, was Jack's suggestion to share a place with two of his friends so that we could all split the bills. It wasn't quite what I had in mind, but I was familiar with both of them and eventually, against my better judgment, agreed to having roommates. The four of us soon moved into the upstairs apartment of an old 2-story house in a seedy neighborhood. Of course, it wasn't long before stuff hit the fan, as neither of the roommates consistently paid their share of the rent, and the place was overrun by people who didn't live there. The constant drug use, fighting, property damage, kicking out random people sleeping on the couch, etc., it was pure chaos. And I was just an outcast, living somewhere that I clearly didn't belong. But the worst part of it all for me was that Jack and I had grown apart. It was as if I never really knew Jack at all. No pun intended. Living in a house full of potheads and drug addicts for several months made me hate drugs, and even weed, to be honest. Yet I continued to smoke it myself in an attempt to find some semblance of peace and happiness. My own friends would visit often, which also helped me to cope with the hell that I was living to some extent. But still, anytime I had a reason to get out of that house, I did. And so was the case on Halloween night of that year. My friend Steph, not her real name, had stopped by to hang out. We both smoked for a bit before getting the munchies and realizing it was Halloween. Being that there was never any food in the house, because someone would always steal it, we quickly recognized the solution to our problem and set out on foot to relive our youth and score some free chocolate bars. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Yes, we were too old for trick-or-treating. Yes, we should have been ashamed of ourselves for taking candy that was meant for little kids. Yes, we were selfish and immature, and no, we did not care. We were just hungry. The timing was perfect, as people had just started filing down the street with kids in goofy costumes racing from door to door. Steph and I weren't wearing costumes because, well, we were bums. And that's the answer we gave every time we knocked on a door and they asked. I'm sure the ones who didn't question us had already figured that out when they saw the used wrinkly Walmart bag that we held open for candy, though. Having satisfied our munchies while eating candy along our little adventure, we decided to keep walking and knocking as long as we could to increase our future candy stash. It wasn't until the streets were silent and empty, with nearly every porch light turned off, before we finally called it quits and began our long trek back to the apartment in the dark. The mood soon changed on the walk back, though. Up to that point, it had been a fun and memorable night, but for some reason neither of us could shake this awful feeling of impending doom, as if we were about to star in our own real-life horror movie. From a rational perspective, this fear was simply due to walking in the dark on Halloween, but the fact that we never told anyone where we were going or what we were doing stuck in our minds. We weren't even sure if anyone knew that we had left the apartment. Not that any of them would have cared, but the mere thought of nobody having a shred of information to share if we went missing somehow, it was suddenly quite unsettling. The night air grew colder by the time we finally found ourselves speeding down the hilly block of houses that led to my apartment, and we were both glad to see that the porch light in front of my door was still on. We slowed our pace toward the bottom of the hill as we crossed the street towards the sidewalk, and our fears soon became reality. From behind a vehicle parked in our neighbor's driveway, a very tall man quietly stepped out of the darkness. As silly as it sounds, he was wearing what appeared to be a large, hairy werewolf mask draped over his entire head, paired with Freddy Krueger gloves on his hands. He stared intently, gently tapping the long, spiky claws of one of the gloves against his chest, as he rounded the bumper of the vehicle before slowly moving towards us with each step. It was actually quite terrifying at first, but I quickly assumed that it must have been someone we knew from the apartment trying to scare us. So, brave little me started laughing and mocking his stupid outfit. What the man did next, though, chilled me to my core. Still silent, he stopped moving, cocked his head to one side, and lowered his hand from his chest. Then, he suddenly started speed-walking right towards us. A second wave of fear coursed through my veins as Steph and I instantly bolted across the sidewalk toward the front door. Steph made it to the threshold first, and I leapt inside soon after, quickly trying to slam the door and lock it. I saw the wolf mask facing me immediately behind the door as I did so. and just as I locked the deadbolt, he tried turning the handle from the other side of the door to get in. We were merely a split second away from whatever that was. Steph and I collapsed on the floor trying to catch our breath as we heard him scratching at the door with his claws. Someone eventually looked down the stairwell to see what the commotion was about, but by that time the scratching ceased. As we made our way upstairs to see who was and who wasn't in the apartment, I was shocked to see a room full of people that included both of the guys I suspected of pulling the prank, as they were similar in height and build to the man outside. One of the guys did go outside to see who might be trying to get in, but the man was long gone. Everyone in the apartment denied having anything to do with it, and they all couldn't have cared less, including Jack, so it really didn't seem like they were behind it. The only other possibility that crossed my mind was the guy who lived below us with his wife and baby on the first floor, but when I later asked the wife about it, she told me that it couldn't have been him because they were all inside that night, and they didn't have any company. Steph and I never did learn the true identity of the Wolfman, and we will never know what his true intentions were that night. Perhaps it was a well-orchestrated prank by someone we knew, or maybe it was simply a prank by a random stranger. I prefer to think of it as a prank either way because, regardless of who was behind the mask, the thought of this being anything other than a prank is very disturbing. As for Jack, our relationship finally ended when I left him. After I moved out, he kicked his friends out of the apartment for not paying rent, and he was stuck cleaning up the mess they left behind. Great time to man up, Jack. To anyone who made it this far, trust your instincts. Stay smart, stay safe, and stay sane out there. Okay, so I've been going trick-or-treating since I was a little kid. It's something I love doing, and it is one of my happiest childhood memories. I lived in one of the few suburbs in my country that really got into Halloween and trick-or-treating, so I was really lucky to be able to go when I was young without being told people weren't interested. I still go, but technically I'm taking my younger siblings out, and I keep an eye on them to make sure they don't get into trouble. My parents don't like the idea of kids being constantly watched or overprotected, and wanted us to grow up without needing constant supervision. And that being said, they didn't really want my younger siblings to be unsupervised. I was about 17 or 18 at the time when this happened. Anyway, about Halloween, I guess you could say that I'm a big kid at heart. I took my two siblings, Jake, who was 8, and Nala, who was 6, out trick-or-treating. I was also roped into taking Nala's best friend, Stacy, and Jake's best friend, Thomas. I didn't mind, though. I've known the kids since they were really young, and it would give me some time with my girlfriend, Sarah. I didn't bother to dress up, but Sarah brought some fake fangs in order to be a vampire. She and I held hands and talked while the kids would run in front, but we told them to always stay in view. They did. Mostly. There were plenty of other kids and families around walking and getting lollies, and most people were dressed up. We took them from house to house, their bags began to fill up, and every so often they would run back to show us what they got. We got dibs on some tasty lollies, and overall it was a nice night. No rain or anything that would ruin it. My parents told me not to keep them out too late because they needed to make sure they would be ready to go to bed. Tomorrow was a school night, so she understandably didn't want them to be too tired. A lot of people were making little goodie bags filled with candy and extras to give to the kids, mainly to stop one greedy little kid from taking a massive handful and not leaving any for anyone else. It was what my parents did too. I only mention this because it is relevant for later on. The streetlights were on, and it was darker than I wanted it to be. I herded up the kids and began to walk home. My girlfriend and I listened as my siblings both excitedly told me about how much they got, what compliments they received, and what other awesome costumes they saw. They were already talking about what they wanted to wear next year. By this point, I'd already began to mentally drown out their conversation. It was pretty cute, but I dropped my girlfriend off and the other kids off at their home, and we stayed a bit for a chat with her parents and then walked my siblings home. I stayed out too late and got a text message telling me to come back. My parents weren't very happy with me, and they told me to bring them home now. I guess you could say that I lost track of time. My younger siblings and I began to walk quickly back home. I jokingly said it was time for them to pay up and reached into their bags to take some of the candy. The price of taking them out, I guess. I reached in and opened their bags to their half-arsed whining. I pulled out one of the small goodie bags and opened it up. Expecting to see something tasty, I was confused by what I saw there. It was just empty wrappers. Okay, kinda mean, but a trick, so pretty harmless. My siblings ran in the house screaming happily about what they received, while I stopped on the front step. I tipped out the containers of the bag, and I saw a rusty razor blade. I held it in my hand for a few moments. There was also a rock, a piece of dried broccoli or something. I didn't care about the random extras. Without the rusty razor blade, it almost would have been kind of funny. But a rusty razor blade? I was completely taken by surprise by this. I very well could have cut my hand when I reached in, and I figured that that was their plan, too. I could have needed a tetanus shot if it hurt me. I've heard rumors about old wives' tales of people trying to pamper with lollies, but I never believed it. I asked my brother which house this one came from, and he couldn't remember. I asked my sister, and she couldn't remember either. I told my mom about it, and she called her friends to warn them. Soon, it passed around the grapevine to check all the bags. A few other kids had rusty razor blades in their goodie bags as well, along with other unwanted items. Fortunately, it wasn't anything more dangerous than that. None of the kids could remember which house they went to. There were so many, and do keep in mind that these were all our neighbors, and people we've known for a long time. No one really would have ever expected this to happen. Our local suburb went from being a place where kids felt safe to where parents ended up being more careful and even kind of suspicious of each other. I'd heard about the rumors of razor blades and candy in the US, but I didn't think it would happen over here in my country. From what I know, it never happened again afterwards, so it was a one-off incident, but the damage was done. My siblings grew out of trick-or-treating and didn't want to go anymore. I haven't heard of any tricks in the bag in the years that followed, and I like to think it was just some edgy teenager who wanted to cause issues, but you never know. I kinda worry sometimes that it was some suburban Karen who finally lost it and wanted to lash out at kids. Who knows? Maybe she, or whoever it was, will start up again someday. Alright, that was today's collection of trick-or-treat horror stories. Horror stories circling tricking and treating. Trick-or-treating? Trick-or-treating? Tricking and treating? I think it's trick-or-treating, whatever. Horror stories around that, as is tradition around this time of Halloween. We are so close to Halloween. And we're almost halfway through the Halloween Extravaganza 2022 Supreme Plus. We're going to keep extending the name every day, I suppose. So, this was Hang on, I apologize. Where's my calendar? Oh crap, wrong month. Wrong month. Wrong month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Day 6 of the 2022 Halloween Extravaganza Supreme Plus. I am confusing myself with the title at this point. It is 2022 apparently. Anyways, day 6. Yeah. Hopefully you all enjoyed the stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. I'd appreciate it. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, you can hit that thumbs up button. Or, no, you can hit that. You can also hit the thumbs up button, but I already said that. You can hit the subscribe button to subscribe to the channel. And if you really liked what you heard, you can go down to the comments and leave me your thoughts. Let me know what you're thinking, how you're doing, how your day's going, all that stuff. Stop laughing at me over there. Anyways, I hope you're all doing well. And I hope you're, enjoying the extravaganza, as you will. I am. I'm having a good time. So, all that said, friends, I do hope that I see you on the next video. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you're the best you that you can be. No one should ever tell you otherwise. Never let them. If they do, steal their candy on Halloween. And until I see you again, sleep well.